Let's assemble our political panel for their take. Rick Davis is with us, and we've talked to Rick about it before. Bloomberg politics contributor, Republican strategist, longtime campaign manager, and now partner at Stone Court Capital. Back together with Matt Robison, former campaign manager, Democratic strategist. Rick, Matt, welcome. Where are you on this today, Rick? Following the rhetoric from Steve Bannon, a lot of Democrats think this is a plus, not a liability.
Yeah, I think Bannon is more right than wrong in the sense that we are entering a new phase of politics where both parties have basically embraced populism, different brands for different people. But we've seen the blurring of the lines between Trump and Bernie Sanders for quite some time. And I think at the core of it is just an anti-establishment boom. Donald Trump rode to the presidency in 2016 on an anti-establishment within the Republican Party, characterizing people like Bush and McCain and others as being weak leaders, and made progress within the MAGA movement for that. This is just sort of the Democratic version of the MAGA movement. And good luck having had to live through that in our party. I'm glad to see it starting to happen to the Democrats.
Wow. All right. So give us your thoughts on this, Matt. Rick points to MAGA. We've heard a lot of references to the Tea Party, the Democratic version of the Tea Party, starting to spout up around the country. How do you see it?
I actually agree with Rick completely, and I gladly accept his thoughts and prayers because I'm not looking forward to what we're about to go through. And I don't think Democratic leaders really are either. Look, the rule of thumb when I was in campaigns was when Republicans sprinkled the word socialist or socialism on top of their messages, it added about 10 points of effectiveness in terms of moving voters. And I don't know if that level of sting is still in the charge that candidates are socialist. But we're going to test the proposition of whether Steve Bannon is right. And this is really about outsider, anti-establishment energy that's going on. There's certainly a lot of evidence to that. And the PCCC ad, I think it wouldn't upset too many Americans to say, yeah, I'm kind of sick of the two-party system. I don't like what either of them are doing. But what's making Democratic leaders nervous right now is you have a candidate like Manny Rutinel, who emerged from the primary in Colorado 8 this week. And he's kind of a standard issue progressive. But that creates the evidence shows about 1 to 2 points of drag on the prospects for a Democratic candidate versus a more moderate. And then the bigger concern is a candidate like Daria-Liza Chevalier out of New York. I'm sure Rick agrees we are going to see plenty of in Republican messaging this fall. And the question, is that kind of a charge going to be something that sticks and something that Democrats can push their way through?
Adam Green at the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, Rick, says 2026 is our put up or shut up year. What will that mean for organizing, for energy, for money?
Yeah, it's hard to tell what he means by that. This is the very beginning of that movement. Everybody thought Mondani was a isolated example. Now we're seeing it exist in other places like Colorado and Michigan. And so the Democratic Party has to really start to deal with it. But right now, it's more of a opportunity for sort of the left of the progressive movement to rally around some principles. I wouldn't say that I'm seeing it as a big, broad national campaign. But look, this is up to the Democratic leadership to start to deal with it. And there are lots of options. I'm not going to give any advice to the Democratic Party, but if they don't deal with it now, then it will become a national movement because a lot of people are looking for a place within the Democratic Party, and they're not defining where to play and how to have an impact. And one thing Bannon says is it's not about Trump so much as disappointment within the Democratic Party that their establishment hasn't been effective against Donald Trump. So now let's give somebody else a chance. So Trump plays a role in this, and as long as Donald Trump's president, you've got a fire within the Democratic Party that needs to be dealt with.
Matt, Speaker Johnson says you can call it the Bolshevik Revolution of 2026, the communist threat. They actually sent Hakeem Jeffries from the leader's office a sympathy card and flowers after the primary in New York. How does Hakeem Jeffries manage this? Because his name comes up in every one of these. His candidates, in many cases, who he endorsed, lost to Democratic Socialists, in this case, in his own city. Should he start to try to own this a little bit more and widen the tent?
Yes, he absolutely should. And I agree with Rick. It really is on Democratic leaders to try to co-opt, embrace the energy that they're getting from the grassroots. We've seen an attempt like this on the Republican side with Michael Steele, then the RNC chair, saying, I'm a Tea Partier. I'm into all of this. But this was like circa 2014. Didn't work out well on his side. And so the main message here, I think the real takeaway from all of this is voters are passionate about change. The party that best embraces the message of we are the change agents. We are as upset as you are with the status quo, with the way things are going, with the raw economic deal that you've gotten. As Rick alluded to a moment ago, it's the same core DNA that you find in Bernie Sanders' message and Donald Trump's message. The party that best is able to capture that message is the party that is going to win in 2026 and in 2028. And it really is on Democratic leaders to say, you don't need to go to outsiders. You can find that with us.
There's something to be said about harnessing the energy in your party instead of denying it. The DCCC, they got a bunch of checks in the 24 hours after the Supreme Court ruled this week on political ad spending, or political spending at large, I should say. Nearly $400,000 in the 24 hours following the ruling, its biggest day in more than a year. This was the ruling that threw out the federal limits on coordination between committees and candidates. What does that tell you about maybe an emerging energy prompted by the Supreme Court ruling?
It's good news. The sneaky headline out of the Supreme Court ruling, the part that really has Democrats nervous, is that what the Supreme Court actually did was remove Democrats' biggest point of financial leverage that they've harbored for an awfully long time. It's something I used to take advantage of as a campaign manager myself for a long time. Democrats have done a better job of raising money to their candidates. Republicans have done a better job of raising money to their parties or their party committees. And so the reason that's such an advantage for Democrats is that by law, TV stations had to give candidates the lowest possible ad rates. That meant that Democrats could stretch their campaign dollars a lot further. It was something like 3x to 10x leverage. And so what the Supreme Court did this week is they said that parties and party committees get those same low ad rates. Right now, the Republican Party has about $130 million cash advantage over the Democratic Party. So in essence, one way of doing the math of this is it's like they've just handed an over $1 billion hammer in terms of how far those dollars can stretch to the Republican Party. Wow. And so if you tell me that the DCCC is getting a lot of checks in the door that they can use, I'm saying, good, that's great, keep it coming.
When we start talking about America 250, and we'll get into this whole fundraising mess, the Freedom 250 versus America 250. Rick Davis, are we in a world in which celebrating the country's birthday has become a partisan activity where hanging a flag, an American flag in front of your house is an indication of your political persuasion?
Yeah, I don't think it's gotten that far. I think there's been plenty of competition in Washington around who controls what events and that kind of thing. I mean, obviously the president, when he took office, created his own group, Freedom 250, to compete with the congressionally mandated official celebrations that have worked for years to prepare the country for this great anniversary. But I got to tell you, Joe, after you and Kaylee's description of the mall on the 4th of July, who in the world would go down there? I mean, is there something positive you could say? Oh, by the way, the hot dogs will be really good or something.
Yeah, we're working on it. We're looking.
Well, Joe did mention they're trying to set a Guinness World Record for number of fireworks. You may not be able to see them, but you could still say you were there when the record is set. And at the end of the day, Matt, is this not about patriotism? Are we lacking that as we celebrate 250 years?
I don't think we're lacking patriotism, but I agree, Kaylee. You've just done a bang-up job of describing what sounds like hell: noxious vapors, stifling heat, a fetid swamp where the reflecting pool used to be. Yeah, I'm not exactly signing up for that. Look, I agree with Rick, though. There's been no better display of the true spirit of America than what's been widely reported around the country. Real Americans welcoming visitors from around the world to our home soil World Cup, showing the generosity of spirit the friendliness, the neighborliness that really is quintessentially American. So that's what I like to focus on. I was watching the World Cup match last night with my family. We had our American flag out proudly displayed. I don't think that's become particularly partisan yet.
Okay, I'm glad to hear you're both together on that. Rick, I do want to ask you about the fundraising matter because this is real news. The Washington Post reports that House Democrats are accusing President Trump's allies of working to divert funds away from the official congressionally mandated event you referred to, America 250, and toward Freedom 250, whose officials and allies, they say, steered money away from America 250 and toward projects shaped by President Trump. Some donors were given routing and account numbers that directed funds to Freedom 250, the Trump event. So what's going on here?
Yeah, look, I mean, Freedom 250 is basically a for-profit organization. The commitment initially was that private funds would be used to foster this kind of patriotic activity. Doesn't seem like a lot of the events have panned out that well. Various celebrations on the mall didn't attract the kind of headliners you wanted. So the headliner became Donald Trump. Now Donald Trump's giving a speech on the 4th of July. Sure, everyone is just hot in anticipation of that happening for a couple hours before the fireworks. But look, I mean, all of this stuff, unfortunately, inside the Beltway, as Matt and I have described, is a cesspool, makes the reflecting pool look clear. And the reality is all going to be investigated significantly throughout the course of this year and next by Democrats in Congress, especially if they get the majority. And it'll just add to the frustration that the American voters have about whether or not their leaders in Washington care more about themselves than voters and citizens of their country. A sad reflection of our country's 250th anniversary.
Look forward to the hearings, huh?
Yeah, especially as we consider the potential outcome of the midterms. As we consider the American voter, though, Matt, I just wonder, especially as we consider what we're seeing in this primary season, how you see this playing out. Are we still going to have a two-party system, or are we going to have a four-party system that includes the far left, the far right, and then those more in the middle?
Kaylee, that's a fascinating question. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're right. That is the dynamic that we're seeing play out right now, where people with outsider credentials are doing well in Democratic primaries. We've seen this kind of dynamic on the Republican side before. Of course, the ultimate avatar of the outsider credential is Donald Trump himself. And it does seem like party establishments on both sides do have a vested interest in quietly trying to preserve the system against outsiders who seem pretty bent on radical change. And in the case of the Republican Party, I'm sorry to say, a certain amount of corruption and graft that we're seeing grow up around this Trump administration. The news of how much profit Trump has garnered through his cryptocurrency ventures, the mining venture that Howard Lutnick announced, which is going to profit his sons and Trump's sons. That doesn't seem to be the direction that the American people would want or that the founders envisaged. So I don't necessarily foresee a fracturing of the parties into four, but I do see a kind of a common set of shared interests emerging, where the question is really going to be, do we want to preserve the system that we're celebrating over the course of 250 years? Do we think that's been largely successful? Or do we all feel invested in it, or do we not?
Weigh in on this, Rick. You were still working with John McCain in the Senate when the Tea Party emerged. You've been through distortions before, particularly in a primary season, particularly in an off year when the party's in a minority position on the Hill. Is this just par for the course? Or is Kaylee right? We could be going outside of the lines of these traditional party structures in this next cycle.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's always going to be the flanks of the party that pose a obstacle to party unity. And yet I would say one of the things that is disturbing to me, I'm a big fan of the two-party system. I think it's done really well for our country for a long period of time, creating security and prosperity. But at the end of the day, more and more voters are just basically rejecting the concept of being a Republican or a Democrat. I just saw a recent poll that new registrants are basically splitting 27% each for Republican and Democrat. But the rest are all identifying as independents, which is a massive increase in the number of self-identified new registered voters going on the independent route, meaning that they're not happy with either party and are looking for options. At the end of the day, I was very impressed with your interview just now with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, who said, you know what, we're working on all these bipartisan bills, and he enumerated a number of them. I never thought today I would hear such a deep-throated endorsement of bipartisanship from a Republican in Congress. So there's hope. Maybe it's a message for the next 250 years.
Hear, hear.
And we will leave it on that hopeful note. Rick Davis and Matt Robison, our political panel, thank you so much for joining us on this eve of the holiday weekend, and a very happy 4th of July to you.